afternoon. Welcome. We're so happy you could join us for our webinar today. My name is Tamara Bingham Noyes. I'm the Director of Business Development here at Center for Change. We're thrilled to have Dr. Heather Finley with us again for her fourth presentation in her series, Get Brain series, and it's been a phenomenal series. If you haven't had a chance to see the other three, they're recorded and on our website, so feel free to scout those out if you'd like to. And Heather has built from one to the next to the next to the next, so today will be a culmination of all of that, and we're thrilled to have her with us again today. Before we get going, just a couple of things you'll see on your screen, some reminders for you before Dr. Finley gets going, and then I'll circle back and tell you about them again at the end of the presentation. So a copy of the PowerPoint is in the handout section of the toolbar. So on your GoToWebinar toolbar, you'll see one that says handouts, and there is a copy of the PowerPoint there. There's also a copy of the post-test in that same handout section. This is for reference only. So in order to obtain continuing education credit, you must take the online post-test. I'll talk more about that in just a minute. You'll also find all of Dr. Finley's references listed in the handout section as well for all four of the presentations. So if you're looking for a reference, she has a ton of references, so they can't all fit on the slides. So if you need that information, you'll find that in that handout. You're welcome to submit questions in the questions section of the toolbar. We'll try to get to a few questions at the end of the webinar. Previous webinars with Dr. Finley have had tons of questions, so we usually go over time. So if you're able to stick around with us after and listen to Dr. Finley answer questions, you're more than welcome to do that. So just go ahead and type your questions in. I'll keep an eye on those throughout the presentation, then we'll circle back at the end and address some of those questions. When the webinar ends, there will be an evaluation that will automatically pop up on your computer. If you would take just 30 seconds or so to fill out that evaluation, that would be really helpful for us. That's a continuing education requirement for us. It's completely anonymous, so please feel free to be candid in that information. That information is then tabulated and returned back to the CE entities. So watch for that at the end of the webinar. And then about an hour after the webinar ends, you'll receive a separate email from GoToWebinar with the link to take the post-test. You must take that post-test online. Once you pass that, then the continuing education certificate will automatically be downloaded to your computer. If you don't see it, check your downloads file. Sometimes it hides there. Okay, I think we're ready to roll. I'm thrilled to have Dr. Finley with us today. She was with Center for Change for a bit as an outreach specialist. She's a private practice dietitian. She specializes in gut brain. She has her doctorate in clinical nutrition, and she's an all-around amazing human. So we're thrilled to have you with us again, Heather, and I'm going to hand this over to you. So give me just a second to get there.
Okay.
Okay, should be coming your way.
All right. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yep, looks good to me. I'm going to go ahead and pop out. I'm still here if you need me, but I'll turn off my mic and my camera, and then I'll see you at the end of the presentation.
Okay, sounds great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. If this is your fourth time with me, thank you for spending 4 of your very valuable hours with me. I have definitely had so much fun doing this. And so I'm super grateful to Center for Change for allowing me to have the opportunity to do this. As you've learned, gut health is complicated, but it also isn't. And I'm going to show you that today, how we tend to somewhat overcomplicate things, and give you a lot of practical tools on how you can actually apply this to your patients. So I'm hopeful that today will be extremely valuable to you. In kind of wrapping this whole thing up. There's a lot of still things that we could talk about, but I'm hopeful that you've learned a lot throughout the process. And even if anything, it's just piqued your interest to go learn more. I will say I have been struggling with some kind of cold, so I'm hopeful I can make it through this without coughing. So excuse me if I do. So we will get started. I'm Dr. Finley, like
Hey, Heather,
Tamara shared.
sorry,
Yes.
hang on a second. I think your screen, what I see is minimized. It's not full screen mode for your presentation. Will you see if you can make it bigger? Sorry to
Sure.
interrupt.
Okay, hold on. Let me try again.
Yeah, no problem.
Let's see.
I could see it. It's just partially.
Okay, hold on. I think
Maximize your
because I
screen.
was only showing, here we go. What about, let's try this. What about now? Is that better?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm out.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for telling me. Okay, so my name is Dr. Finley, like Tamara shared. I am a registered dietitian. My training has been in gut health. I have spent about a decade also working in eating disorders. Like Tamara shared, I worked with Center for Change for several years and was very sad to leave. They are a fantastic company and team. So I'm glad I get to be connected with them in this way now. And like I said, my focus is on gut health, partially because I saw a gap in treating my patients, and also partially because I personally struggled with digestive health issues for about 20 years and just felt really frustrated by the lack of answers and the lack of clarity on why I felt the way that I did. So a lot of what I've learned is through my own trial and error, both with myself and then also learned from my patients. As you know, as a practitioner, your patients are your best teacher, and you can learn so much just from listening to them and learning from them. All right, so today we are going to talk about nutrition, obviously, because I'm a dietitian. We're going to talk about nutrition considerations for the gut brain. We're going to talk a little bit about the nervous system, and then get into some supplements. I will say I did get a lot of questions about supplements. That could be a whole webinar series in itself. And so I'm going to touch on that briefly, but it's just going to be scraping the surface on that. So just to recap, if you haven't been here for all 3 of the previous webinars, or if you are just trying to remember all that we have covered, it's been a lot. We talked a lot about, just in the first one, digestion and absorption, the whole digestive process, all the things your body needs to be able to digest and absorb nutrients from your food. In the second webinar, we talked about the communication pathways between the gut and the brain and hormones and the nervous system. And then last time together, we talked about trauma in the gut, different types of trauma and how they affect gut diversity, bacterial balance, etc. We also have talked about why diversity matters. And what I mean by that is diversity of gut bacteria and diversity of the food that you eat. And really the whole thing has been centered around the gut-brain axis. So how your brain is communicating with your gut, how this is applicable to the patients that you're working with, and how you can use some simple strategies to be able to optimize this connection and improve outcomes with the patients you see. Okay, so as you've learned, your microbiome is as unique as a fingerprint. So what is unique to you is very different from what is unique to me. There are so many things that we are still learning about digestive health. We have 100 trillion microbes in our microbiome, and they're now looking at the gut as kind of your own fingerprint, like identification. You have different microbes for a lot of different reasons. You could have different microbes in your gut and on your body from your route of birth, from trauma that you've experienced in your life, from the food that you ate growing up as a child, from the food that you're having now, from the stress that you have in your life now. There's so many things that can modulate our gut bacteria, which makes your gut unique to specifically you, which is really cool. So as much as we do know about the gut, there's really a lot that we still don't know. we barely even knew about the gut-brain connection even a decade ago. And so the research is still coming out every single day. We are learning so much about this. And so if I were to give this webinar 10 years from now, I'm sure several things would be different, and just we would have a lot more clarity around some of these concepts on how we actually really can optimize the gut-brain connection, specifically in this case to treating eating disorders and those with mental health conditions, but really how the gut affects everything in our body, and how the gut is linked to so many different health outcomes. So really, like, we have to kind of ask the question, what is gut health? I think like diet culture has kind of made gut health this like super trendy term. Like it's very, very popular in the media for a good reason, but I think gut health kind of gets misconstrued sometimes on what does that actually even mean? So what I'm really referring to when I'm talking about gut health is, number one, digestion. So the function of digestion, the transport and absorption of nutrients from the food that you're eating, the assimilation of these nutrients, and then also just getting waste out of your body through having bowel movements. So really digestion is kind of the head to toe process that we talked about in part one, like from chewing and salivating to having a bowel movement, that whole entire process, how things are working, stomach acid and enzymes and movement of your intestines. And then secondly, gut health is immune health. We know that about 70% of your immune system is in your gut. And so we're finding more about this every single day, how autoimmune conditions and other immune-related concerns are linked back to the gut. And then lastly, microorganisms. So this is really just your balance of microbes. What gut bacteria do you have in your gut and everywhere else on your body that are helping you to digest foods that we actually as humans cannot digest? And then the gut-brain connection. So how are these microbes in your gut speaking to your brain? How is your brain speaking to your gut, and vice versa? So I think gut health can be super confusing, like I mentioned at the beginning, and we tend to overcomplicate it, feeling like there's so many different things we can do and so many different things we can try, and that is true. And really what works for one person may not work for the next, but really where we need to start is getting the brain and the gut online first. So if you are dealing with a client who has struggled with an eating disorder for a long period of time, then helping them to eat enough and support just their general body functions first is really where you need to start. We can spend so much time trying to look at all these fancy supplements and testing, but the reality is that if you're not eating enough to support your daily processes, your heart function, your lung function, your brain, your gut is going to suffer. And so that's something, before you really even think about looking into some of these things, we need to make sure that our clients are just getting the nourishment that they need each day. So here's some nutrition steps that we can take. So I have it kind of stepping stones, like here are the steps you can take in your practice. Here are the steps that you can take with your clients when you're looking at really like, where do I start? So we're gonna break each of these down in separate slides, but you can just kind of save this as a reference when you're trying to figure out, where do I start with my clients and how do I help them? What comes before what? So like I mentioned, really we have to get the gut and the brain online first. So if your client is chronically under eating, or if they're binging and purging, or if they're restricting throughout the day and binging at night, normalizing those food behaviors is number one, because we cannot improve digestive health without enough fuel. So first we want to ensure adequate calorie intake. And this is a great time to just acknowledge the pain and the suffering and the GI complaints that your clients are coming in with. they probably do have a lot of digestive concerns, because when your body doesn't have enough fuel to do what it needs to do, like I mentioned earlier, your body is focused on keeping your heart pumping and your lungs breathing and your brain thinking, and the gut will slow down because that's not as essential as those other things. So you can see in this visual here, when the brain determines that caloric intake is too low, or it's variable, if one day it's not and one day it is, your client is still in starvation mode, and it's still causing a lot of stress on the body. So the gut is going to slow down digestion, which makes their digestive symptoms worse, which makes them feel worse. So showing compassion, showing empathy here, and explaining to them that the undereating is actually maybe part of the cause of the digestive concerns that they're having. Slowing down the thyroid is the next piece. So your body doesn't want you to starve. It slows down your metabolism, which further slows the gut down. We know that thyroid function affects gut motility, and gut bacteria actually affect your thyroid. So that can be kind of a chicken or egg scenario as well. And then this just adds stress to the adrenals. And as you've learned over and over again throughout these last couple webinars, is stress is the #1 trigger for really a lot of things in the gut. And so as stress increases and puts more demand on the adrenal glands, it's increasing cortisol production, it's adding more stress to the thyroid and the gut, and is just causing this super, super vicious cycle. So nutritional rehabilitation is always the main #1 concern. And sometimes that can be hard, getting your client to get to a place where they're eating enough calories to support their daily body needs. So this might take longer than you think, depending on the client. Next up is focusing on meal hygiene. So what I mean by that is really like how someone is eating, when they're eating consistently throughout the day. So encouraging them to eat meals that are satisfying to them for 3 to 4 hours, 15 to 20 minutes to eat their meal. Often, just as a society, we rush through meals, and that makes it harder for our bodies to digest food if you're not chewing appropriately. So getting them to really slow down, chew their food, savor their food, so that they're mechanically breaking their food down before it enters their stomach. Trying to sit with company if possible, doing some of the deep breathing that we've talked about in the past couple webinars beforehand. This is a great way to have them focus on things that they can do versus things that maybe feel out of their control. So they can focus on taking some deep breaths before they eat, even though maybe they can't control how their stomach feels after a meal. Giving them some of these tangible things can be really empowering and helpful. And then just as kind of a reminder, the reason for the 3 hours-ish between meals is because of that migrating motor complex. So that is that intestinal sweeping cleanup crew that comes in and sweeps and cleans the intestines out in between meals. I always tell my clients, eating enough calories always trumps this 3 to 4 hour spacing. So if they are hungry, or they are not eating enough food, this is always secondary. This is not a priority at all until they're eating enough food. And so one thing to just ask your client, if they're getting really hungry in between meals, it could be a blood sugar thing. It also could be that they're not eating satisfying meals. Maybe they're not getting the protein, the carbs, the fats that they need at meals to feel satiated. So again, don't put the cart before the horse here. Focus on getting enough food first, and then you can focus on some of these meal hygiene pieces. So this does not have to be all or nothing. If food still remains very stressful for your client, as it does for most, trying to slowly adapt to some of these things, but really like trying to get them to do the breath work to calm the nervous system, to allow those digestive juices to start flowing, and to allow their bodies to digest the food as well as they possibly can. But yeah, this step, as well as the first step, can be very hard and definitely take some time to get to. The next up is blood sugar balance. So as you've probably experienced with many of your clients, due to long periods of under eating or extended periods of binge purge cycles, or really whatever it is eating disorder related, blood sugar is a huge player. So we see our clients having really big blood sugar swings, and helping them to just have a name for it and connect it. Okay, when I get nauseous in between meals, when I get shaky in between meals, if I'm irritable or hangry, as you've probably heard the term, if I'm waking up in the middle of the night hungry, is it my blood sugar? So in some ways, this blood sugar balance could actually go before the meal hygiene, depending on where your client is and the unique situation, because keeping blood sugar stable throughout the day is going to help prevent these blood sugar spikes, these blood sugar dips that definitely increase digestive symptoms. When your blood sugar dips and you are having a hypoglycemic episode and vice versa, that affects your cortisol. And so under eating or imbalanced blood sugar is a stress on the body. There's also research showing how imbalanced blood sugar for extended periods of time, especially in the case of diabetes or even type 1 diabetes, that affects digestive function because of how it affects the nerves. So your client may not have diabetes or type 1 or type 2, but if they have really imbalanced blood sugar or even just low blood sugar as a result of their eating disorder, this is going to make their digestive symptoms worse, because that is a stress alone on the body. And as you've learned, stress is stress, whether it is stress or some other kind of stress. So helping them to plate their meals accordingly, getting adequate amounts of carbs so they have the ability to increase their blood sugar to where it needs to be, proteins and fats as well, so they're satisfied with their meals. So like I said, sometimes this portion goes along with the under eating, teaching them to have balanced meals, teaching them to eat enough to be satisfied in between their meals, and just the feeling of being okay, being full. That's definitely something to process with clients as well, and can take some time. Next up is resolving the constipation. So what you will see most of the time is that when your client is eating enough calories and they're able to have breaks in between their meals, they're eating enough to feel satisfied in between their meals, their blood sugar is more balanced, their gut issues will get better most of the time. Not always, because depending on how long they've been struggling with an eating disorder, depending on their genetics, depending on so many things, sometimes people will still struggle with constipation. I was actually messaging someone about this yesterday on Instagram about just how oftentimes really the key to improving these uncomfortable digestive complaints that our clients struggle with is through eating enough food for a good amount of time. You know, this is likely not going to improve in a week, but walking them through that and just giving them some of the tools that I'll mention at the end to help them feel more comfortable in the process. But we talk a lot in this seminar series about fiber and about feeding your good gut bugs and about how those things are so beneficial for building up your army of good bacteria. But if your client is constipated, we need to resolve the constipation first, because if you're trying to get them to add in these fibrous food sources to resolve their constipation, I wish I could ask for a show of hands and see you guys right now, but just think about how many times maybe you've sent your client to a GI doctor to get a workup and they've been told, just drink more water and eat more fiber. And they come back just super frustrated. That has happened. That happened to me personally. That's happened to so many of my clients. We can't load the gut up with fiber until we resolve the constipation, because if we're throwing fiber at a gut that isn't moving, it's going to make them more constipated. So we need to relieve that first. Magnesium citrate can be very helpful for constipation. You definitely need to work with your client on the right dose for this. Doing some of the vagus nerve stimulation that we've talked about can be really helpful for constipation. So gargling 2 to 3 minutes a day, or gargling before their meals, just gargling water. Ginger tea is amazing for constipation. You can have them brew some hot or cold ginger tea and drink it in between meals. And this is really helpful for gut motility. So drinking ginger, sometimes clients need a motility prescription or supplement in severe cases to really get their bowels moving. Remember, your gut is a muscle. So if your gut, or the client's gut in this case, has been not exercised for a long period of time due to undereating and malnourishment, then this muscle is out of shape. And so it will take time for this muscle to regain strength to be able to have a bowel movement naturally and easily. You can think of it like going to the gym. If you haven't gone to the gym in 6 months, you aren't going to show up your first day and load up your heaviest deadlift you've ever done in your life. You're not going to feel so good. In fact, you might injure yourself. So same thing goes for the gut. If all of a sudden the client is loading themselves up with psyllium husk and all these really high fiber foods, they're probably not going to feel very well. And another thing to mention is that fiber needs water. So making sure that your clients are hydrated is another piece of this. Anytime someone increases their fiber intake, they need to increase their water intake. So first step, get the bowels moving. This can actually be through making sure they're getting adequately hydrated. There's actually lots of foods that really help with constipation. Chia seeds, just start very low, like a half teaspoon a day. Up to maybe 1 to 2 tablespoons a day can be extremely helpful for constipation. There's actually really great research about kiwi fruit and eating 2 kiwis a day and how that really helps with constipation. There's research about flax seeds and how it helps with transit time, bananas, figs, prunes, all of those things can be really helpful. Prebiotic fiber, which we'll get into in a little bit, is really helpful for constipation as well. But those are typically the foods that make your clients feel the most uncomfortable because they're fermentable carbohydrates. So they're drawing water to the colon and making clients feel extremely bloated. So you want to go slow with some of those foods, which I'll mention in a bit. So resolve the constipation first, and your client will feel a lot more comfortable. They don't need to do all of these things, but you can definitely recommend 1 or 2 of these things to start and to be able to help them have a bowel movement. Some other things you may even want to think about is just the proper positioning. A squatty potty or just stacking up books and getting their knees above their hips is really helpful in relaxing, trying to do the type of breathing that you would do if you're in labor, that low humming breathing to help relax the pelvic floor can be really helpful. So next up is fiber. I've mentioned this many times, but your microbes are very picky eaters. So the ones that like oats are very different from the ones that like green beans and very different from the ones that like bananas. So one thing that could be contributing to your clients' digestive complaints and even what's going on in their brain as well is the lack of variety in their diet, because the lack of variety in the diet is leading to lack of diversity of gut microbes. So I have this right here. Where's my lentils? Where's my kiwi? Your clients want, or not your clients, your gut bugs want variety. And the more variety that they have, the more abundant variety you have within your gut. So slowly working on helping your clients to add in variety of foods. I think that's where gut health goes wrong a lot of times, is it's so focused on what do I need to cut out in order to help my symptoms. But the reality is most of the time it's what do I need to add in? What am I eating repetitively that I can change up every once in a while to help to fuel this digestive health puzzle that we're trying to put together. So really, like, part of this is, I think, just in this kind of wellness culture, diet culture of gut health, we're a lot of times eating fiber that we weren't necessarily meant to consume. There's so many fancy fiber powders and fiber supplements, and some of them do have their time and their place, but getting your fiber from food is your body's preferred source. So your gut bugs are the ones that digest these fibers, and if you are restricting your intake to just a small amount of foods, which many of our clients do, then you don't have the capacity to be able to digest these fibers, which makes them feel very uncomfortable when they do add these things back in. So again, your gut is a muscle. It can adapt over time, and it can definitely take some time to do this. Another note about fiber is that there's a lot of questions sometimes on, should I have them eat insoluble fiber or soluble fiber? And really, both are helpful. The example that I would give for this is a pear. So the pear has both. The outer skin is that roughage, that insoluble fiber, whereas the fleshy part, the inside is the soluble fiber. So most foods contain both, and both are very helpful for digestive complaints. So you don't need to focus too much on the balance of those, because you're generally getting both from the foods that you consume. So the general recommendation for fiber is 25 to 38 grams per day. So it's a pretty broad range, because obviously, you know, height, weight, all these different things are going to, gender, all these things are going to affect fiber needs. And what you may find is many of your clients are not even anywhere close to this. Maybe they're getting 5 grams of fiber a day. Most of the foods that people restrict are the foods that have fiber. Most of your clients are restricting carbohydrates, and a lot of those have fiber. So slowly working on adding fiber into their diet can not only help their digestive complaints, but also help this gut-brain connection, because the gut bugs are what are sending these messages up to the brain as far as that communication pathway. So increase the variety over time. Most Americans, studies show, eat about half of this fiber, and the Human Microbiome Project has done some research about this, and there's a lot of research right now about how 30 different plants a week is what is recommended to support digestive health long term. That sounds overwhelming, but it's really not when you think about it. So one way that you can help your client increase diversity in the food that they're eating, pending that the constipation is better, pending they're eating enough calories, all these other steps that are coming before this, is think about spaghetti sauce. If you're making spaghetti sauce and you're using tomatoes, maybe you also add garlic, and maybe you also add mushrooms, and maybe you add some carrots in there and some onions, and maybe you also add parsley and oregano. Right there, you have a wide variety of foods. So you can get 8 to 10 different plants in one meal, because really what's classified as a plant is a fruit or a vegetable, but also nuts and seeds and herbs, and whole grains as well. So a lot of foods are classified in this bucket. It can actually be really easy to achieve this. Mentioning the 30 plants may not be the most helpful recommendation depending on the client, but overall the theme is getting diversity. How can we switch up what you're eating? How can we add in a new thing, maybe one new thing a week, to just help promote that diversity in their gut? So we talked a lot about prebiotic fiber in previous seminars, but prebiotic fiber is the type of fiber that feeds the good gut bacteria, and that's the fiber that we want to help increase that diversity in our gut, because we know that when our gut bugs eat prebiotic fiber, they produce short chain fatty acids, And these short chain fatty acids like butyrate are anti-inflammatory to the brain. So there's a lot of research as far as mental health is concerned. They help reduce inflammation in the gut, and they help with overall gut function. So they improve the gut barrier, they help with diversity, and overall inflammation. So there's lots of foods that have prebiotic fiber in them. Things like asparagus and garlic and chicory and artichokes and leeks and onions and soybeans and whole wheat. All these foods have prebiotics, and encouraging our clients to slowly start to consume some of these can be helpful in improving this gut-brain connection for them. All right, so then last time we dug in a little bit to some of the nutrients that are helpful for gut health. And again, this is very just kind of a broad overview because this could be a whole seminar in itself. But some of the things that we know from research that help with the gut-brain connection as far as nutrients are concerned are omega-3s, vitamin D, prebiotics, vitamin A, zinc, and vitamin C. And the reason that we want to focus on some of these, so to start with, we'll start with zinc. So zinc, as you learned last time, is extremely helpful for stomach acid support. It's also really helpful for gut lining support. It's helpful for the immune system, and it's absorbed in the small intestine. There's lots of foods that have zinc in them. Lots of animal proteins have zinc in them. Pumpkin seeds are another source of zinc as well. Lots of other nuts and seeds have zinc. So encouraging this zinc consumption can definitely be helpful for improving digestive function, improving stomach acid, and I'll talk a little bit about the supplementation in a second. Next up is vitamin C. So vitamin C is extremely helpful because it helps to improve the gut barrier function. So if you remember the picture from, I think it was part 2, where we looked at the endothelial lining of the gut, vitamin C is really helpful in gluing that barrier back together and protecting the barrier from opening up and allowing foreign pathogens to get through and causing the immune system to go crazy. So vitamin C can be really helpful for that. It also is helpful for the absorption of iron, collagen production, and actually really helpful for constipation. So whenever I think of vitamin C, I think of citrus. Anything citrus is high in vitamin C. Also baked potatoes, strawberries, apples are really high in vitamin C as well. Some really interesting emerging research is coming up on omega-3s. I don't know about you, but I do not do a good job of eating fish very often. It's not my favorite, but focusing on getting omega-3s in your diet can be extremely helpful for a lot of different reasons in the gut. There's really great research showing that omega-3s actually help with bacterial diversity in the gut. They also help with inflammation. And there's also research showing that omega-3, especially EPA consumption, is helpful for depression. So encouraging your clients to get omega-3s from things like salmon can be really helpful. There are plant-based sources of omega-3 that aren't as usable by our body, things like chia seeds and flax seeds and hemp seeds, but still really great to add as well. Vitamin D. So there are certain types of gut bacteria that actually help to convert the inactive form of vitamin D to the active form of vitamin D, and it helps with gut diversity as well. So adding in things like mushrooms and eggs and salmon and tuna and cow's milk, it can also be high in vitamin D as well. Vitamin D is also extremely helpful for mood. I know specifically in many of my patients, they are low in vitamin D, and helping to improve vitamin D levels definitely helps with mood. You would think, especially for me, like I live in Texas, it's sunny, I shouldn't be deficient in vitamin D, But I often find clients who live in even warmer climates are lower, and this is just anecdotal, because they spend more time inside. I personally don't enjoy spending time outside in the Texas summer, and so I may be more deficient in vitamin D than you would think. Uh-oh. Tamara, did my screen just stop sharing? Hold on.
Yeah, it did.
Sorry about that.
All
I
right.
don't know what happened. Hold on one second.
I'll tell you when you're back up.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. Can you see this?
Yeah, but now you need to go full screen like you
Okay.
did before. Yep, now you're back up.
Okay.
Yep, you're
Awesome.
good.
Where was I? Omega-3 or vitamin D. So focusing on vitamin D, even just encouraging our clients to get outside 10 minutes in the morning and get that sun exposure can be really helpful, not only for their gut health, but also for their mood. And then prebiotics, which I mentioned as well, the fuel source for your gut bacteria. There's this overemphasis, I think, on probiotics. What probiotic should I take, or what probiotic is going to be helpful for this? But if the probiotics don't have a fuel source, then they're not super effective. And then lastly, vitamin A. So vitamin A kind of keeps the peace between your immune system and your gut bacteria, and it just prevents your immune system from being overactive. So it definitely helps with gut lining support and IgA levels. And keep in mind, both vitamin D and vitamin A are fat-soluble vitamins, meaning you can overdose on them. So sometimes more is not better, which is where trying to get these from foods can be really helpful. If you need a supplement for vitamin D, that can be helpful, but you definitely, especially on the vitamin D side, would want to get levels checked and not just over supplement, because more can definitely cause more harm. Vitamin A, think red and orange foods, any carrot or bell pepper. Actually, liver is really high in vitamin A as well, if you enjoyed that. So dig into this and maybe start to encourage your clients to add some of these things in, knowing that these nutrients are extremely helpful for their digestive health as well as their brain health. So next up, we have polyphenols. I wish I could do show of hands again and hear who has heard of this term. Polyphenols are aromatic compounds that are found in foods that actually, they're found in foods that actually prevent plants from UV radiation. And they are actually considered a prebiotic because they feed good gut bacteria. So if you want a list of polyphenols, Tamara, I'll actually send this to you because I'm not going to list all the foods that have polyphenols because it is extremely long. But polyphenols are very helpful foods foods that have polyphenols are extremely helpful to add in because they help with blood sugar balance, they help with brain aging, they actually help us to break down fiber because they encourage good amounts of bifidobacteria and lactobacillus, and they help us with that short chain fatty acid production that we're looking for in order to optimize that gut-brain connection. There's actually some research too showing that polyphenols help with osteoporosis prevention. So lots of foods have polyphenols, like I said. Some of my favorites are blueberries and blackberries. Green tea actually has polyphenols, coffee, even red wine has polyphenols as well. So lots of different foods there. The other thing to keep in mind is if your client is having trouble adding in fibrous foods in order to improve their digestive health as well as improve variety, resistant starch can be a really helpful tool. It's typically better tolerated than some of these whole grains that they might have trouble digesting at first, and so this can be a good stepping stone. But resistant starch is basically long chains of glucose that are found in lots of different types of grains and potatoes, and not all the starch that you eat gets digested. So resistant starch as well functions just like a soluble fiber. It helps with insulin sensitivity, it lowers blood sugar, it improves digestion. And like I mentioned, you can get these from grains and seeds and legumes. But one cool way to actually increase the resistant starch content of foods is cooking potatoes and then letting them cool. And you can reheat them after, they'll still have resistant starch. But the cooling process actually will increase the resistant starch amount. And that alone is a way to improve digestive function, because like I said, it functions like a soluble prebiotic fiber, but typically without some of the digestive complaints that some of the other fibrous foods you may hear. All right, so everyone's favorite topic, probably the most questions that I got throughout this whole process, is probiotics. What probiotic do you recommend? What strains? So something to keep in mind is probiotics are like travelers. They come in, they see the sights, they eat the food, and then they go back home. So they're coming to Italy, they're enjoying the pizza and the pasta and the wine, and then they go back home. This is exactly what probiotics do in our system. They are live microbes that, when administered in adequate amounts, they infer a benefit to our health. But really, the type matters. The strain matters so much. So just like you wouldn't just walk into CVS and grab something random for a headache, you would want to take the right medication at the right dose for the right amount of time. Same thing, like if you had iron deficiency, you wouldn't take vitamin D for iron deficiency because it doesn't make sense. So we tend to just throw probiotics at people for no reason because, oh, I heard this one is good. But if you're not matching the strain to the condition, it's probably a waste of your client's money, and it might not necessarily make the problem worse, but it may just be frustrating that they're trying something that's not necessarily doing anything for them. So there are a lot of resources for this. One site that you can check out is probioticadvisor.com. Another resource that I think is helpful, and I had a part in creating, is there are some papers published, and they are linked on the resources tab, but they go through all different health conditions and all the research supporting different strains of bacteria and products that you can find them in, and what strains are found. So for example, this research study was looking at anxiety, and these were the bacterial strains that were studied. This is what they found. And then here are some products actually that you can find at your store that contain these strains that might be helpful. So use this as a reference. You can download all of these articles. But what we know from research is that the Lactobacillus helvectis strain, the Bifidobacteria longum strain, and then the Lactobacillus rhamnosus strain are all really helpful for mood. And there's lots of products on the market that have these. Some of the ones here that are mentioned, as well as many, many others. Here is another resource for you as well. So I screenshotted part of this chart that walks through the health concerns. So we have ADD, cognitive decline, autism, depression, MS, traumatic brain injury. There's a lot of things on here. Professional and commercial products that are available that support these conditions and the strains that are in them. So I hope this is a helpful resource for you. This was a doctorate project that I was involved in that was very involved, but also a lot of fun to look at. But one of the most helpful pieces of this chart is actually looking at foods that contain these probiotics, because one of the best ways sometimes that you can get probiotics is actually just through food. So instead of trying a million different probiotic supplements, sometimes there are foods available that you can add in. So this might be a really good resource. The reference is on the bottom of this slide. And like I said, the rest of them are in the document that's attached to this module. So just keep in mind, probiotics, especially the strains that I mentioned on this slide, are helpful. We know that they can be really helpful for mood, and they are definitely worth a try, but having your client go to Whole Foods and buy the most expensive probiotic with the highest amount of strains is definitely not useful. So the type matters, the strain matters, and you need to match the condition to what you're trying to do. So another thing to keep in mind as well is that you're not necessarily going to need to supplement a probiotic long term. Probiotics can be helpful for a period of time trying to achieve the outcome that you're looking for, but actually switching up strains is really helpful. Broad spectrum and probiotics can be helpful in that they're just giving a lot of different types of bacteria to the gut, but it may not be necessary long term. And then kind of a portion off of this is something called psychobiotics. So psychobiotics are a type of probiotic. They're live bacteria which when ingested, they have mental health benefits through their interactions with gut bacteria. So including these types of probiotics can be really helpful. You can see from this visual here how these different psychobiotics, when fed with prebiotics, are producing these short chain fatty acids and how they're affecting gut hormone release, anti-inflammatory cytokines, how they're affecting actually the gut-brain barrier, and how these can be really, really helpful. So looking at psychobiotics can be helpful. There's actually a really great book about this. It's called Psychobiotics if you want to look into it. It's a little technical, so definitely it might be a slow read, but it does have a lot of really good information. And some of the strains I mentioned are that type of strain where they do cross the blood-brain barrier, they do have mental health benefits, and this is definitely an emerging field and something I'm sure that we will continue to learn more about, and how these bacteria actually really do help with some of these mental health outcomes. Okay, so fermentation is a way that you can help your clients actually to get probiotics in their day-to-day without necessarily having to take a probiotic. There's really not a ton of research on this. I would say most of the evidence is anecdotal just because there's not money in doing research on this. So we know that fermenting food can definitely help to improve the bacterial balance in the gut. It actually can help with the bioavailability of different vitamins from our food, and it will increase lactobacillus in the gut as well. But really, fermenting food, like if I were to make kimchi in my kitchen and you were to make kimchi in your kitchen, wherever you live, the strength, the strains may be different depending on the climate. So definitely consuming things like yogurt and kimchi and sauerkraut can definitely be helpful, even things like kefir. But just know that these are things that you would want to go really slow with your clients. You're not going to want to have them make a huge kefir smoothie on the first time they're ever trying kefir, because fermentation can definitely increase digestive complaints if it's not something that someone is used to, but it can be a great way to introduce some of these bacteria through the food that they're eating by doing a little science experiment in their kitchen, making them, or you can purchase these at a lot of stores. All right, so to really sum it up, nutrition for gut health is so much more than food, as you have learned throughout our time together. So nutrition and food is one piece of it, but really, as I've said, nothing matters if the nervous system is so active and in a fight or flight all the time. If food is a threat, or if food is stressful, or if the eating experience is stressful and your client just cannot get out of that fight or flight, this is a super vicious cycle. So it doesn't matter what supplements they're taking, what food they're eating, the digestive complaints tend to be worse. So we really have to focus on all these different components, the stress and nervous system support, the nutrition and food, which sometimes just looks like making sure that your client is getting enough food and enough nutrition, and then potentially looking into any kind of functional gut imbalance that could be going on as a result maybe of long-term restriction, looking into like, is there an overabundance of bad or unwanted bacteria, and how can we address that? You know, what do stomach acid levels look like, etc. So here's where I'm going to briefly talk a little bit about supplements. Again, this could be another 3 webinars in itself. So hopefully this is just a helpful place to start and something to get you to start looking into some of this. So in the first webinar, we talked a lot about stomach acid. I got so many messages from people saying how interesting it was and how helpful that was. So definitely want to talk about this more, but keep in mind that stomach acid is something that can play a huge role in how your client is digesting and absorbing their food, and the symptoms that they're having. They're super bloated every time they eat. It could be a stomach acid thing. If they feel like food just sits in their stomach and it's not going anywhere, it could be stomach acid related. But some other things that you may want to ask your client, do they have clay colored stool? If their stool is not brown, there's something going on from a digestive standpoint, whether it's stomach acid or pancreatic or whatever it is. That's something to ask them. Do they have oil droplets in the toilet when they're having a bowel movement? That could be something to really look into. Is there a lot of food in their stool? I'm not talking about corn, but are they seeing large pieces of food? Then we're going back to making sure meal hygiene and chewing is adequate, but they may need help with stomach acid. And one way that you can do that is digestive bitters. Digestive bitters really help to stimulate digestive juices in getting the body to actually produce these digestive enzymes and juices that we need to digest our food. So those are some things to look into. And also keep in mind too that if the client has been malnourished for a long period of time, we're really looking at, there's probably a lot of deficiencies. Like I mentioned previously, zinc being one of them, magnesium being another. So zinc is extremely important, as well as magnesium, and how it interacts with acid in the stomach and producing acid. So if these things are deficient and they're not adequate in the diet, then stomach acid could be a part of it due to these other deficiencies that they have. So as your client's wells run empty with some of these resources, it's harder for the body to produce some of the things that they need. So doing this supplementally could help them to actually digest their food better, feel more comfortable when they're eating, and then as you're slowly getting their body and brain back online, and being able to do it on their own. I know there was a question last time about the forms of zinc. So zinc picolinate, zinc acetate are both really good forms. Typically those are going to be 15 to 30 milligrams a day. You definitely want to start low on that. You don't want to cause any nausea or anything. If we're looking at actual gut lining support, zinc carnosine is the form of zinc that actually will glue those tight junctions of the gut back together. So zinc carnosine is in a higher amount, 75 milligrams a day. That can be really helpful. Probiotics, pick the strain that fits the condition. Pick some of the strains that I mentioned, look at that chart, look at some of the products that are available with those, and that could help guide you. Looking at their omega-3 intake. If the client is not eating higher omega-3 foods or eating fish, supplementing with omega-3 could help to increase diversity in their gut, reduce inflammation in their gut, help with depression, help with some of the mental health pieces of this as well. Digestive enzymes kind of get thrown in this bucket of stomach acid support, but sometimes they are needed in order to help just create more comfort in being able to increase the amount of food that they're eating and be able to help digest and assimilate it, so they're having regular bowel movements. And then replacing minerals and electrolytes. So Clients that are chronically dehydrated tend to be very mineral deficient and electrolyte deficient. Also, clients who drink only filtered water, this is something to think about on the mineral side of things. I actually had a client recently who she only drank filtered water, refused to drink tap water, and she just talked about how she was always thirsty. And so I had her put minerals in her water and electrolytes, and she messaged me and she's like, my thirst problem is cured. So sometimes it doesn't have to be overly complicated. There's just maybe little things that actually can really help our clients to feel better and help to just put the body back online. So like I said, this is really just scraping the surface. You definitely don't need to give your client all of these things. You have to take the whole picture into consideration when you're looking at this. You know, what is the case? How can I support the client, and like what are the #1 needs right now? But these are just some ideas to get started. All right, so to sum it up, so when we're looking at the gut-brain axis and eating disorder recovery specifically, #1 is ensure adequate calorie intake and get the body out of stress. #2, so apply appropriate nervous system support, mindfulness, meditation, therapy, doing the breathing before meals to help calm their nervous system down so their body is in rest and digest when they're about to eat a meal. Addressing any underlying gaps in their diet, encouraging dietary variety, encouraging meal hygiene, encouraging them to try new things, and definitely including some of those prebiotic rich foods that help to feed good gut bacteria, and then maybe playing around with improving fermented food intake, maybe adding in some probiotics to help with a specific need if necessary, can definitely make a difference. So I hope that this was helpful. I hope that you have walked away with some really helpful tips to get started, or it's piqued your interest in this topic on just different ways that you can help your clients. So I know I went over as usual, sorry. I could talk about this for hours and hours. So I will hand it back over to Tamara, and thank you guys so much.
Heather, okay. We have a ton of questions. So before we get to questions, I want to do the quick reminders in case folks have to bail out of the presentation because they've got clients, etc. So just 2 reminders. When the webinar does end, when you hop off or when I end the webinar, either one, there'll be an evaluation that pops up. If you would please take a minute to complete the evaluation, that would be really helpful for us. That's a continuing education requirement for us. We tabulate those results and send them back to the CE entities, and it's completely anonymous, so feel free to be candid in that feedback. And then about an hour after the webinar ends, you'll receive a separate email from GoToWebinar with the link to take the online test. You must take the test and pass it online in order to receive continuing education credit. Once you pass, then that certificate will automatically be downloaded to your computer. So if you don't see it on your screen, check your downloads file. It should be there. Okay, as I said, we have a ton of questions. We could probably be here another hour, and I'm sure that's not going to work for everybody. So I'll pick some that sort of have a theme if we've gotten more than one in that area, and then we'll get to a few. And then just FYI that Heather gets these questions after the fact. She gets a report with the questions on it so that she can address it if she chooses to. She has an awesome Instagram page. It's gutbrain.nutrition. And I know she answers a ton of questions on her Instagram page. And so if your question doesn't get answered today, feel free to reach out to Heather on her Instagram page, and she can you can reach her that way. All right, here we go. Any thoughts on meals that take 30 to 60 minutes? I have clients that drag out their meals and wonder if there are any negative side effects associated with this. It's a lot of time for parents to provide meal support.
Yeah, that's a hard one. I would say it depends. I hate saying it depends because that's not helpful, but it really depends on where the client's at. You know, if they're in the beginning of recovery, like maybe making goals to decrease it over time. If it's really due to like digestive complaints, then finding ways or working with a GI or someone skilled in this to help them, make them more comfortable while they're eating. Like I said, like maybe it's a stomach acid thing or maybe in need of some help. But oftentimes I would say that's mostly anxiety related. And so, you know, slowly making goals to decrease the meal time, which may take a couple weeks or months to get it to be kind of more in that like 15, 20-minute range, if possible.
Thank you. How does the MMC relate to preschoolers, where it is recommended to eat snacks as well as meals? Do they need to wait 3 hours as well?
Yeah, I love this question. I actually have a preschooler, so I've been asked this as well. Kids are different. I mean, their systems are different. I don't know specifically because there's just not a lot of research on kids. But the time period is shorter just because their bodies are growing and they need fuel. So they definitely probably can't make it. I know my daughter, for example, like we're verging on a low blood sugar meltdown if we wait longer than that. So yeah, kids definitely are growing. They need more energy and that time period is going to be shorter.
Okay. Can you speak more about the link between not enough protein and fat and increased cortisol?
Yes. So when you're eating carbohydrates, so fruits, grains, pasta, bread, your blood sugar is spiking and then it's crashing. And so I always tell my clients eat carbs with friends, and the friends are protein and fat. When you eat, you know, let's say you're having pasta, but you have some kind of meat sauce on it, your blood sugar is spiking and then it's stabilizing because carbs are digested super quickly, 15, 30 minutes. Whereas proteins and fats take several hours. And so it just helps to stabilize that blood sugar curve so you're not having this quick spike and then a subsequent crash after, which can then kind of lead to this blood sugar roller coaster that I often see a lot of my clients on, you know, due to like very limited intake or like only eating a piece of toast with nothing on it or something like that.
You talked a lot about constipation, but we had some questions about what if the problem is chronic diarrhea? Do you have some thoughts around that?
Yeah, I wish I had time to go in depth on this because yes, diarrhea can sometimes be common. I would say the number one trigger for like a gut brain reaction for diarrhea is stress. So I've talked a lot on the previous webinars about like a gut instinct. You know, you're about to give a big presentation or you're nervous about something and you go running to the bathroom. So working on stress response and calming the nervous system down can do wonders for diarrhea. But that being said, make sure your client's actually not constipated if they have diarrhea. What I find often is the analogy I give is like a bathtub. If you're filling your bathtub with water and the drain is clogged, eventually it's going to overflow. And a lot of times clients actually have what's called overflow diarrhea, in that their pipes are full and they're getting these like 3 days of constipation, 1 day of really bad diarrhea and like clearing out. And that cycle just repeats. So look at stress for sure. And then also look at this overflow diarrhea. It's really, really common.
Thank you. Okay, most of the good sources of prebiotics, example, onion, garlic, wheat, etc., are restricted in the low FODMAP diet, which is used to treat IBS, a condition seen frequently in eating disorders. What is your recommendation for obtaining sufficient prebiotic fiber in those sensitive to these foods?
Yeah. So the low FODMAP diet can be helpful for people in identifying their triggers, but low FODMAP is not meant to be a lifestyle. It's meant to be a short-term 4 to 6 week or even 2 to 6 week elimination of these specific food categories. And the reason that they cause digestive complaints is because they draw water to the colon. They can cause a lot of bloating, but they are the beneficial foods that feed our gut bacteria. So it's kind of controversial on if you should recommend low FODMAP to an eating disorder client. I personally don't do that just because it tends to do more harm and cause a lot more food fear than necessary. But if someone is doing a low FODMAP diet, you have to do the reintroduction. So it's not meant to be a long-term restriction. doing the reintroduction, identifying which category, is it the fructose, is it the lactose, is it the polyols that are causing the issue? So you can expand the diet, but you need to get to the reason why the person isn't tolerating FODMAPs. So is it bacterial overgrowth in the large intestine? Is it SIBO? Is it, you know, a lot of different things? It's usually a combination of 3 and 4 things. So if you go one step further and you figure out what's causing them to not tolerate those foods, that's a lot more sustainable.
Thank you. Can vegetarians and vegans how can vegetarians and vegans get sufficient omega-3s?
Yeah, so it's very hard for a vegan to get sufficient bioavailable omega-3. Like I mentioned, chia seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds, those can be helpful sources of omega-3. But as far as like looking at like EPA content, it's going to be found in a lot of fatty fish. And so algae omega-3 supplements can be helpful. There's several foods that can be helpful, but you just have to be really diligent about doing it and every single day. But I am kind of in the camp that like it's really hard, especially as a vegan, to get, because if you're not doing eggs or anything like that, it can be really hard.
Since probiotics have to match the strain to the condition, is drinking kombucha also a waste of money if it's not specifically affecting or improving a condition?
Not necessarily. So kombucha, I mean, the probiotic content of kombucha isn't like super high or anything like that. Kombucha is definitely not going to like fix any digestive problem. So I would just say if it's something you enjoy it, and that's great.
Okay. Can you talk a little more about digestive bitters, frequency and duration?
So digestive bitters are exactly that. They're bitter herbs that help to stimulate digestive juices. Some common brands, Swedish Bitters is a really common brand, and they help with bile flow and they help get everything moving so your body can digest food. So typically you would take these like 10 to 15 minutes before you eat, you know, breakfast, lunch, dinner.
Thank you. And then we'll do this last one because we're running out of time. But there were several questions about this, and I know you addressed this in one of the previous presentations, but maybe you can circle back to it. Heather, how does gargling help digestion?
Yeah.
Because there was one about gargling and one about humming, so it's that same thing.
Yeah, another tool that may be easier than gargling, I will say, and I should have mentioned, is just having your client hum happy birthday twice. And that actually stimulates the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve connects the gut and the brain, or the gut and the brain, and it helps to innervate the digestive tract. So it helps to produce stomach acid, it helps with digestive juices, it can help with motility and movement of food and waste through the digestive tract, and it also calms the nervous system. So if we're thinking kind of back to part 2, when we talked about like sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic, if we're trying to get into a parasympathetic state to allow our body to rest and digest and actually be able to relax and eat a meal and not feel like we're being chased by a bear and that it can't digest a meal right now, the vagus nerve stimulation can be helpful for that, as well as just getting digestive movement going.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather. It's been our pleasure to have you for these last 4 sessions, and I hope we get to do it again soon. Thanks to everybody for attending today. Watch for an email in about an hour with the link to take the online test, and everyone stay well. Bye-bye.
Thank you.